Today we're covering everything you need to know to get perfectly smooth sides on your cake. So we're going to walk through the process from start to finish, which really begins with leveling our cake layers. Whenever you're making a layered cake, you want to use a serrated knife to level the tops. Even if they seem pretty flat, you can see these layers baked up pretty nice and flat, but leveling them makes them so much easier to stack, and it's truly a step that's worth taking. I know it takes a little bit of extra time, but you also get to eat the cake tops afterwards, so in my opinion, it's 100% worth it. I like to smooth out the top just to make sure there are no leftover bits of crumbs, and then it's time to start assembling our cake. I always like to add a dab of frosting, kind of spread it out almost like a flower in the center of my cake board to help act as glue and keep that bottom cake layer in place. You also want to take a moment to make sure your cake layer is centered because it's super hard to shift after you started assembling the cake, so making sure it's centered now will make your life a lot easier down the road. Next, it's time to spread an even and relatively thick layer of frosting onto our cake layer. I like to use a large offset spatula, and as I'm stacking my cake layers, I love to do a little squat test and just make sure they're properly aligned. My general rule of thumb is to always add more frosting than you think you need because you can always scrape off extra, but if you don't add enough, your slices are going to be a little bit disappointing looking when you cut in. I also just love eating frosting. So I'm adding my top cake layer upside down here just to make it easier to frost, and these cake layers are at room temperature. You can see they're shifting a tiny bit, so I'm having a really gentle touch. If you want your cake layers to not shift as much and stay in place, I highly recommend chilling them in the freezer for about 20 minutes. It helps that buttercream between the cake layers firm up, and it makes cakes a lot easier to frost. Now we're adding our crumb coat around the cake, which is just a thin layer of frosting that's going to trap in those pesky crumbs. I like to first add frosting using my large offset spatula, and then I smooth it out using my bench scraper. The goal here is to have full coverage so that all your cake layers are covered. It's okay if you can see them a little bit, but you still want there to be a thin layer of frosting over them. I'm cleaning up that top edge with my small offset spatula, and then I'm popping this cake into the freezer for about 10 minutes until the frosting is firm to the touch. Then it's time for the real fun, and we're adding on our second thicker layer of frosting. The goal here is to basically do the exact same things that we did with our crumb coat, but we want it to be a lot thicker. So we spread that frosting around the top of the cake, then worked it around the sides. After I've covered the cake, I try to get a pretty smooth finish with my large offset spatula, adding dabs of buttercream where it's needed. Then it's time to go in with the bench scraper. So your first few passes are not going to be perfect. You'll see there's still some pockets that need extra buttercream. And the key here is to take some more dabs of frosting and just add them on. It feels like you're kind of repeating yourself over and over again. It's a bit of Groundhog's Day, but this is what's going to give you that perfect finish. You also want to add extra buttercream to the top lip of your cake. The frosting should be pushed all the way past the top of the cake in order for you to get sharp edges. So if you see areas at the top of the cake that need more frosting, add it there too. So I repeat this process a few times until I feel like the cake is looking pretty smooth, and then I go in with my finishing touch, my hidden secret, which is running your bench scraper under hot water. So you run your bench scraper under super hot water, thoroughly dry it, and then painstakingly slowly spin your cake while smoothing your frosting. The heat from the bench scraper is going to ever so slightly melt that outer layer of frosting, giving you a perfectly smooth, silky, and even shiny finish. It looks so beautiful and is exactly the look that we're after. I can usually make one pass pretty much all the way around a small cake like this. This is a 6-inch cake, but if you want to, you can totally run your bench scraper underwater a few times and go around it, 2 or 3 times to get it super smooth. So the goal here really is to scrape off as little frosting as possible. Only a tiny bit should be coming off as you're spinning your cake. Once you're happy with the way the sides look, it's time to tackle that top edge of the cake. Like I mentioned earlier, it is super important that our frosting is pushed all the way up past the top of the cake, or else we're not going to be able to get sharp edges. As you're pulling your excess frosting into the center of the cake, it's also super important that you're scraping off your small offset spatula with each pass so that your leftover buttercream doesn't get kind of left on the top and create a domed look. And just like that, our frosting is smooth. Thank you guys so much for watching, and please let me know what tutorials you'd like to see next.